Alright, here's another installment, My Life in a Small Town. It's the day after Christmas. It's December the 26th, 2014. Won't be long till it's 2015. Whew. 2015, Lord have mercy. Pretty day today. It's gonna get up to about 55, 57. Today's installment is going to be on some of my childhood friends, and through the other segments I'll talk about some more of my friends through music, through coaching, through stuff like that, okay? But today is some of my childhood friends. Gonna start off, better put my seatbelt on. Gonna start off with Bruce Allred. Bruce is in heaven now. He died several years ago. And we used to go to school together. Old Bruce, he made straight A's in school. He lived, as you can see, right behind them apartments yonder. There used to be an old house back there. He used to walk up the railroad track in the mornings to my house, and then we'd walk on up to the school, just me and him. You know, back then the school was where the park is, where they play baseball and softball at now. Bruce, I remember one time, maybe I shouldn't tell this because he's gone, but you know, Bruce was talking to me on the telephone one time, and he had been smoking. And he asked me if he called his mom and daddy, if they'd be able to smell his breath over the telephone. I don't know. Right about where Bozeman's grocery store is too. Now this is before those apartments was built back there, and just right behind the store there, you know, which that was right behind his house too. We went over there on our bicycles, and we actually took hoes and rakes and stuff like that and built a bicycle racetrack. Built it and had humps and everything around that. I used to have a picture of that when we was on them bicycles over there, which I don't remember nobody ever going over there except me and him. His brother, big brother, James Allred, I think he lives down in Twillytown. He always drove a bus and ended up being a truck driver. I think he's still, maybe he works on the dock now, but he used to drive a truck there for AAA Cooper. So Bruce, when he got on up into age, he did about the same thing. He got up into high school, and he drove a bus, I think bus number 2, went down the Bryan Road. But anyway, after he got out of high school, he started driving a truck. I remember one time he was hauling gas, and he was somewhere up above Coleman there, close to exit 310. He said he told me he looked out his right mirror in his truck, and he said all I seen was orange. So he started pulling off the road. His gas truck was on fire. The gas started coming up under the truck, and it burnt like 80% of his body. I remember going to UAB seen him in the hospital. And man, it was terrible. I hope that never happens to me. I even remember me telling him one time, I said, man, they was just fixing to wrap him to dip him in that solution, you know, that burned solution, I guess you'd call it. They have to wrap you where your skin won't come off. And I remember they was doing that, and he was in pain, and I said, Bruce, I sure wish I could take your place. And I remember him looking at me, and he said, no, you don't. He was in pain. He got better, and actually started driving that gas truck again. I could have never done that. After nearly getting burned up by gas, he went right back. He ended up at 888 Cooper, where his brother works. Alright, right across from me were those 13, you remember me telling you about those 13 people, my next door neighbor? There's 13 in that family. Well, after they moved and everything, there was a guy moved over there. His name was Tommy Mann. I remember I used to see Tommy. He'd go to the store and he's all the time bringing sacks of stuff. And me and him wasn't friends then, but I asked him, because I was in school and I was making good grades. I just started to high school, but he always had money. He was probably my age, but he always had money, and I had no money because I was in school. And he told me about this job he had where he made money, and he said I could do it too. And it was catching chickens. So he talked me into that. So I went with him one night, and I did that for a while. And I made a little bit of money. When I say a little bit of money, I mean a little bit of money. It was a stinking nighttime job. So I would do that and come home, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd try to get about 2 hours sleep and then go to school. And eventually, what happened, I would walk up to his house. He had moved by then. And he moved up it's kind of behind where that 7-Eleven store in Summerton used to be, Walker 7-Eleven. If any of y'all old timers remember that. It was right in the middle of Summit. He lived behind it there on that Avenue C. And I had to walk right by there going to school, so I would actually go in his house and I would be so sleepy, I would fall asleep. And that's what I got to doing. I would walk up there every day after that. I can't see. There was one day I had took Mother's car keys, and I forgot I had them in my pocket. Well, she went up to Dora High School, and she was going to get her car keys back from me. And the principal said, well, Miss Williams, George hadn't been to school in 2 years. But that's what that started that. Now I'm going to tell you about a friend of mine. He's still a friend of mine. And I'll get back with Tommy too, because he's involved in some of that. I remember walking to that 7-Eleven store one time, or I was walking home from school for lunch. And I remember walking by this little old boy. He was about 5 years old. And this guy was taking care of him, old Fred Alexander. And I remember this little boy, he was a talker. He talked, man. He said, I was probably 15, I guess, 14 or 15. And he said, will you come home and play with me? And I said, little buddy, I've got to go back to school, But eventually, Steve, which is closer to my age, he is about 3 years younger than me, he moved in with them. He's a Dawkins now, but back then it was Steve Rayner and Jerome Rayner. Well, me and Steve became real good friends, still real good friends, after all them years. We've done a lot of stuff together. Steve, I could write 3 books on just me and Steve. Trust me. Trips to Florida, motorbikes. But I used to go up their house all the time at night because his stepdad, J.C. Rayner, played music and eventually became a preacher in that church right downtown Summerton. He eventually became a preacher, but J.C. used to play the club circuit back then. And his wife, Carolyn, which is Jerome and Steve's mama, would stay up where she could go pick him up. So she'd have to stay up till 1:30, 2 o'clock, and then go pick him up. Well, we would set up at their house and play all kind of games, Yahtzee, Rook, all kind of games like that, until it was time for her to go pick JC up. And I remember those times because it was really good times, you know, with them. And I remember we was big time, and they're the ones that got me involved in music and really interested in music and everything, because I wasn't never musically inclined. I loved music, loved listening to it, but I wasn't musically inclined. I didn't play it. Me and Steve, Grady Robinson, oh, that's another friend I didn't put on there. I might have, though. And Tommy Mann would get on their front porch on Avenue A there. I don't know who lives there now, but we would get on that front porch and we would put a record on. You know, records was big back then. We talking in the 60s, there about the middle 60s, 68, 67. We'd get on that front porch, put them records on, and pantomime those songs like Paul Revere and the Raiders. The times that I went to, what was they called, WVOK Shower of Stars, it was with them. So that's the only time I got to go with them, and they was always involved in the top 100. They'd get the billboard and everything, and we would listen to these songs on WVOK, mostly WSGN, because I was a rocker. WVOK was mostly country, and I was a rocker back then, so I listened to WSGN. And like I say, I could probably write 2 books about me and Steve's life, and I'm sure he could too. But I'm just telling you a little bit about it. Jerome, he ended up becoming a musician. So did Steve. Steve played with JC for years, him and Ronnie Sanders, and me and Steve used to go to Florida at least 4 and 5 times a summer. All he had to do was call me and say, let's, and I'd say go, and we'd take off to Florida. But that's the way it was back then. Alright, that's Steve and Jerome, and Lord, I could tell you a bunch about all that. Steve and Jerome Rayner, which Steve changed his name back to his real daddy, which was a Dawkins. So now Steve is Steve Dawkins. And Jerome, he wasn't no Rayner either, but that's the only daddy he ever known. So when he got older, Jerome actually changed his name to J.C. Rayner. So he legally changed his name to J.C. That was Jerome and J.C. Rayner. I mean, J.C. and Steve Dawkins now. Alright, Ken Russell. I met Ken when I was in the Boy Scouts. You know, the last segment was about the Boy Scouts. Ooh. But Ken, his name is Kenneth Russell. He is actually a council member of Summerton right now. Good friend of mine. Love old Ken to death, but I met Ken probably from the Boy Scouts. I remember when I started the Dora down there, Ken was the quarterback. And my son actually idolized one of his sons, Adam. He was number 9 at Dora. If y'all remember him back 92, 93. Well, my son actually had his number in high school, and he was number 9. 02, 03, and 04. I think it was. It might have been 03, 04, 05. Ken, he didn't ever have no car that I remember, so I had a little old motorbike, a CB160, and I'd go pick Ken up, and I'd actually carry Ken to little old girlfriends' houses and stuff, and I'd sit on my bike until he got on the swing and courted the girl, you know. I remember doing that. But the biggest thing I remember in Ken was in the Boy Scouts. So that was Ken Russell. Let me see who else I got here. Danny Crumpton. He was also in the Boy Scouts. He was also my age. Ken was a year older than me. Danny, he was in the same class. We would go, a bunch of us Boy Scout boys would go to Danny's house. He lived in a basement there behind Skurlock's in Summerton. He had a basement. Even in the winter time, he had a bunch of fans. You could turn the lights off in his basement there. And this is just one story. I'm sure I've got a bunch of detailed stories about all these friends, but I'm just telling you the ones from my memory that stands out, okay? But I remember a bunch of us Boy Scouts stayed there, and he had these from the, I don't know, from the National Guard Army or something, had these big wool blankets that they used. And he'd turn them fans on and turn the lights off, and it was cold in there, but them blankets, you wouldn't be cold. He'd turn the lights off and it would be pitch black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And I remember we got in a pillow fight, all of us boys did. And all of a sudden I heard Ken a-gagging and everything, and he said, "I can't breathe." I thought he was having some kind of asthma attack or something. And Danny got up and turned the lights on, and there was feathers flying all over that room, and fans was blowing them. It looked like it was snowing in there. And Ken, it was all in Ken's mouth. He was like breathing in those feathers. Lord, have mercy. We did some stuff. It's a wonder one of us didn't get hurt real bad. But like I say, they tons of stories with each one of these friends, okay? All right. Stan Ballinger. I'm gonna hit on him more when I get to music. And I probably need to just hush on Stan, because that's the first time I ever met Stan. I'll tell you how I met him. The first time I met Stan, some of our first bands, just getting started playing music, we was going to fill in for J.C. Rayner at the Blue 2 one time. And it was me, Roger Ragsdale, which I'm going to get hit on them next. We had a guy named Squeaky, Randy Bailey, but he was doing the thing and drinking, so we kind of fired him, and we hired Roger's cousin, Dennis. But Squeaky and Lynn Reeves, they was friends, and after we fired Squeaky, we was supposed to have played at the Blue 2, and it was like an hour or two, about 2 hours before we were supposed to start playing over there, and Lynn called and said he wasn't going to play anymore. So I called Mike Allen, because I knew Mike played the bass, to see if Mike could help us out. And Mike said he was playing somewhere that night. So he gave me Stan Ballinger's name. I didn't know Stan then. Heard about him from Toy Bowl and stuff like that. So he told me where he lived and everything. So I went down by the old tunnel in Dora and found Stanley and asked him if he'd help us out. And Stan said, sure. And he came that night and helped us, and it sounded like he had been practicing and playing with us forever. Good, smooth bass player Stanley was. Me and Stanley's still good friends too. And I'll hit on Stanley a little bit more when we get to music, okay? Alright, that's Stan Ballinger. Well, when we got started real good as the Crossroads Band, which was me on drums, Roger on lead, Roger Ragsdale, Dennis Ragsdale, which was Roger's cousin, on rhythm, and basically the lead singer, and I was on drums. We was called the Crossroads Band. And I don't know if I were to tell you, and I shouldn't tell you how we got that name, but so I ain't. And anyway, when we got our first really gig at a club, we played Friday and Saturday night down at the old Maxine Tavern. A lot of y'all knows it as the Pink Lizard, around Alliance, Maxine Tavern. The building's still there, but it's growed over and the windows is out now. Real rough place. We played there. And I used to carry a guy with me to help us out with the equipment and stuff like that. And his name was Dennis Coburn. I hadn't seen Dennis in a long time. His nickname was Foxy. But Foxy would go with me all the time. Me and Foxy actually got to running around together, drinking a little bit together, and had a lot of fun. Went places. If I ever met somebody at the club or something like that, Foxy would drive my car home. Not my better judgment, but I'd let him. And sometimes I'd even go by his house to see if I could trust him. And my car would be sitting in his yard, so he would go straight home. Foxy always had the monkey on his back of drinking. But he is a good friend of mine, and and I'll always remember that through the years, okay? Alright. That's about it. Like I say, there's a lot of friends, and I'm probably leaving some of them out, and if some of them sees this, they'll say, hey, I was your friend too. Well, I know it. I know you as my friend. I'm just remembering some that stands out that I had long-lasting relationships with. And the ones I named, I was friends with them for a long time. And some of them still are, like Steve, Stanley. Those. Steve comes by the house all the time now. I went and had Thanksgiving dinner with Steve. We all getting old now. But anyway, that's some of my friends there, and I'll touch on some more of them, in other segments here, I'm sure. But the next segment is some of my jobs I've had. I'll touch on some of them. I've had a lot of jobs. I was a truck driver